This is a video walkthrough of Lab 2. I'm going to be verbally taking you through the whole process. Uh, I'm going to be saying a lot, so if you want to, you can put this video on fast speed and make it a little shorter and faster for you. Okay? So the first thing you do is click on the assignment link. Under the assignment link, I see Lab 2 here. I'll click on it. From now on, I will not give you a zipped folder. Instead, I'll give you each individual file. So the first thing I want to do is open up the Lab 2 specs. I'm going to open that up in Word. And in the Lab 2 specs, I see here that it wants me to download two files, the Python file and a Word file that I'm going to use to copy my output into that. So I want to download those two files. I'm going to go back here, and when I go to download the Python file, when I click on it, it shows up within Canvas. So I want to click on the download button. I click on that, I will save the file, and it is now going into my download folder. So I'm going to find that file. I'm in Firefox, so I'll find it like this. And I want to show my desktop. I'll take that file and copy it onto my desktop. Going back to Canvas again, I want to go back one step and I'm going to save the file to copy my output and choose to save it. I'll locate that file and again drag it onto my desktop. So I've copied the two files onto my desktop. The next thing I want to do is rename these files. So I'm going to delete this out of here, put my class code. Your class code will be 127 or whatever the case might be. And then my last name, you will put your last name. I'm going to also do this for my output file. I will put my fake class code and my name. So now I have the two files copied onto my desktop and renamed with my class code and my last name. I want to now launch PyScripter. I've launched PyScripter. I want to get rid of this dummy module. I'll go to File, Open, go to my desktop, and find my lab file. There it is. I've opened it, and now I'll change this to my class code and my last name. I don't need you to put your class time or anything else in there. That will suffice. I'm going to save it for good measures. And then I'll go back to this. I just completed this part. I'm now going to read the program description. It says you are asked to write a program to calculate the cost of purchasing fruit. The user will input the amount of apples and oranges purchased by the pound. So the user has two inputs. I will always indicate the input down here. So it says when you run the program, input 8 and 5 for apples and oranges. It is important that you put this in the order that I specify here. So if I ask for apples first, you're going to put apple as your first input and orange as your second input. Nevertheless, these are the only two things the user will enter when they run the program. Okay? Your program will calculate and display the output shown below. So the output will always be given to you also. In this output, I'm asking you to print the BG fruit receipt, and then apples, the cost of it, oranges, how much you paid, the cost for the oranges, the subtotal, the tax, and the cost. So when I look at this, I see that there are 5 values being printed out, which means I'm going to have 5 different output variables, one for each of the items printed. The cost of apples is $1.25 per pound, and the cost of the orange is $1.75 per pound. The sales tax is 7%. You will use uppercase for all symbolic identifiers for the two prices and the tax rate. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to a blank Word document, and I'm going to start to figure out exactly what I want to do here. So I'm going to open up a blank Word document. I'm going to set this off to the side and set this off to the side, and going to start listing some things I want to do. So the first thing I'm going to do here is list what I'm going to have as my input variables. And one input variable, of course, will be the number of apples, and I can abbreviate that, number of apps, and that's going to be my number of apples in pounds. The next thing I want to do here is I'm going to enter the number of oranges. So again, I'm abbreviating. I'm going to call that number of oranges in pounds. And then I'm going to think about what I want to output. Well, one thing I want to output is my cost of the apples. So I'm going to call this cost of apples. And I'm going to use that Campbell case so I can distinguish the difference between the words. I also want to output the cost of oranges. So I'm looking over here. I also want to output the subtotal. So I'm going to call this subtotal. I want to also output the tax. And finally, I want to output the cost of it all. So I have a list of everything that I'm going to print out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rest of these things that are printed out are cosmetic, so we don't need variables to hold those things, okay? Now, intermediate variables, variables that I'm going to use for processing. So one variable I'm going to use for processing is, and I say the cost of the apples, but let's call that the price of an apple, okay? And also the price of an orange. Now, it's very important that I call these variables two different things. By distinguishing them apart, I give them different prefixes, and that will allow me to distinguish between one variable and the other. I cannot call these the same thing. The other thing I shouldn't do is try to call one of them uppercase and one of them lowercase. In fact, because these are what we're going to deem constant, let's make this all uppercase. Price of apples, price of oranges. Okay, so I went back and I changed these to all uppercase because these are going to mimic my constant. One is going to be the price of apples, which is $1.25, and the other one is going to be the price of the oranges, which is $1.75 per pound. Another symbolic identifier I'm going to use is the tax rate. Now notice I called it tax rate instead of tax because it's the 7%, and I don't want to confuse that with how much I'm actually going to pay in taxes. I'm actually going to pay off of $18.75. I'm actually going to pay $1.31. The tax rate is 7%, which is 0.07. So I don't want to confuse those two. And I do that by adding a little suffix here to let me know the difference between the two. Okay, so I now have all my identifiers that I'm going to use for this program. I can start thinking about my algorithm. In my algorithm here, the first thing I'm going to do is initialize these variables that need initialization. The second thing I'm going to do is input the number of apples, and I'm going to input the number of oranges. Again, it's very important that I keep this in the order that I see here, and also notice that I have these prefixes here, number of apples, number of oranges, to distinguish it from the cost of the apples or the price of the apples. Okay, So the first thing I want to do once I get my input is see what I want to calculate first. And the first thing I'm calculating is the cost of the apples. So I'm going to put calc here, and I'm going to say cost of apples, and it's equal to the number of apples times the price of the apples. Okay, so I have that there, and notice I have the word calc right there, which is not going to be a part of the Python language, but that's okay because that gives me an idea of what I'm going to be doing there. What am I doing here? I'm not a fan of a lot of typing, so I just copied and paste that, and I'm changing it to cost of the oranges equals to number of oranges times the price of the oranges. So now I have the apple cost, the orange cost, and I need to now calculate the subtotal. So I'm going to again calculate the subtotal, and it's going to be equal to, again, not a fan of a lot of typing, orange cost. Okay, so I have my subtotal now calculated. The next thing I want to calculate is the tax. And what is the tax equal to? It's equal to the subtotal times the tax rate. So the tax rate is 7%, and I take 7% of the subtotal to get that value there. So I've now calculated the tax. The next thing I want to do is calculate the cost. And the cost, of course, is equal to the subtotal. And don't be like me. The first time I copied and pasted that expense calculation, and I left the minus sign there, but it should be subtotal plus the tax. And finally, I want to display the results. And that's all the things that I want to do for this program. So I see it all down the line here. By the way, these greater than symbols you see here are Python prompts. They're not a part of the output here. Some students mistook that for part of the output. The output will start with this thing right here. Okay, so now I have my algorithm. I now want to go to Python and start coding some of this. So I'm going to see if I can set this off to the side also so I can look at my algorithm. The first thing I always want you to do is put begin as the first comment right there after you've put your program header comments. So I put begin there, and I'm now going to have an initialization section. So my initialization section will consist of the Apple price. Again, not a fan of a lot of typing. Apple price is going to be equal to 0.25. My orange price, again, 0.75, 1.75, and then my tax rate. So I'll just type in tax rate is equal to 0.07. Notice I put that 0 in front of there. It's not needed, but it makes it look a lot neater and nicer. So there's my initialization section. Now, I could initialize cost of apple, cost of orange, subtotal, tax, cost, number of apples. I could initialize all of those to 0. In your programs, I do want you to initialize all of those to zeros. But in the lab, you can simply initialize the significant values. So for instance, if I were to write this as a project, I would say num apps equals 0, num oranges equals 0, etc. Again, I don't need you to do that for the labs for the sake of time. In the labs, I'll simply put my next section as the input section. And notice I added a little space here to separate one section from the other. Okay, and if you don't put section there, I'm okay with it as long as you put a #, input. Okay, all right, so my first input here, of course, is num apps. Num apples is equal to, and I want to input this, so I'm going to use the input, but what kind of data is this going to be? This data is going to be an integer. It's going to be a numeric value, so I can't just put input right there. In fact, I need to put integer first, and then I put input, and now I can type in my prompt. My prompt is what I want the user to see to enter the value. Well, I do want it to be a little action oriented. So don't just put apples or oranges. In fact, since I'm giving you the prompt here, just copy it out of here and put it right in your program, and it's done. I do not want you to just put app or oranges. That's not descriptive enough to tell the user what you want to put in. Copying and pasting this thing is not a lot for me to think about. I'll just put exactly what I asked. I'm not a fan of typing, so I'm going to change this to oranges. And this is how I got in trouble the last time with that minus oranges. And notice I put a little space there between the closed parentheses and the colon. That little space there is so my data that I type in has a little space and you can see it off from the prompt. So that's my input section. That is my only input for the program as I noted here. So now that I have the input, the next thing I want to do is start the calculations. And because I've written this out, I'm just simply going to take this and move it over here. So the first thing I want to do is start the processing section. I don't care if you call this processing, calculations, as long as you separate it. Notice I have a little space there. I'm going to paste that in there. And I'm going to grab the next one and paste it in there. Notice I did not grab calc. That is not a part of the process. I'm going to paste in the next one, the subtotal. Why type it all over again? If I did my job creating my algorithm, I can simply just reuse them. Remember, everything must fit up against the margin. I'll grab my taxes. Hopefully you're a little more careful than I am when you grab these things. And I'll grab my cost. So I've now calculated all the things I needed to calculate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I look back at the program description, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things I needed to print out. So all of those things are there. The next thing I want to do is start my output section. So output, if I could see, I could type this thing. So my output section. So output, and then I want to go about printing everything that I have in my output section. So what I'm going to do now is move this off to the side here so I can see it as I create it. So the first thing I want here is simply the word BG fruit stand. So I'm going to type in print BG fruit receipt, just as I have it here. Again, I'm not a fan of a lot of typing, so I'm going to paste this thing here, and I'm going to go back and change this to dash, 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 all the way out to about there. And I have my dash lines now. The next thing I want to do is print out the Apple costs. So again, here I go. I'm going to put this here, change it. I just pasted that there. Change it to Apple because that's exactly what I see over here, apples. Gonna put a little space there, and then a dollar sign within the quotes will give me that dollar sign right there. So the next thing I want to do is I want to format this number to 2 spaces. So I looked up my old code from class and I see that I have to use format and then the name of the variable that I want to use, which is apple cost apples. And I want to take that and I want to format it to 2 places. So I put 0.2 F, and that gives me the format of that. Okay. I'll take this statement, copy it, paste, 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 paste 4 times. So those are all of my statements that I need. I'm going to stick another line separator here because that's what it asked for in the output. So I just need to change this to oranges, making sure that I take space out of here to keep the dollar signs lined up. And I'll change this to orange. I'll go here and I see the next thing that I'm printing there is the subtotal. So I'll type subtotal and I'll back this up one to make sure the dollar signs are lined up. The next thing, tax. I'll space this out to make sure the dollar signs lined up. So I need to change this to subtotal and change this to tax. I'll add another line separator because I see the line separator there. And I'll change this to cost and make sure it's lined up perfectly. And this is simply cost. So I have all of my output statements here exactly how I want them. Again, these greater than symbols are not a part of the output. I'll then go down here and put the new thing that I want you to put in there, and that's just input empty parentheses. And finally, I'll end it with an end comment. And there I have all of my program. So the first thing I want to do is go here and click on run and do a syntax check on it. And when I do that syntax check on it, it says everything is okay. This may not be the case all the time. I misspell a word, I leave off a comma or something like that. I have to then meticulously go through the code looking at it with some sample code that I have. So I should bring sample code to the lab with me to use as a reference if I don't have the textbook. So I can look at the syntax and check it to see what's wrong if I'm not familiar with it. So everything seems to be okay here. So I'm going to enlarge this and then I'm going to run the program. When I run the program, it asks me to enter how many pounds of apples. I'll put in 8 and I'll put in 5. Why did I put in 8 and 5? Because on the program sheet, this is exactly what I asked you to put in. So put in those values. It says run to execute your program and put the following values, right? So I put in 8 and 5 because I want to see if I'm going to produce this exact output. So I put in 8 and 5, and that is the dummy input statement here. I can put in anything there and click OK just to make it go away. Now, I don't see my output fully here because this is not long enough or wide or open enough for me to see it. So I'm going to stretch it out here so I can see all of my output. And now that I see all of my output there, I check it against my code, and I do see that my code has produced the exact output from the program specs. So I'm now ready to make a copy of this. To make a copy of this, I'm going to snip it. Now, on the Mac, there is a snipping tool. I have sent out an email to tell you what it is to snip on the Mac. If you didn't get the email, Google it. It will tell you exactly how to snip things on the Mac. Okay, so I'm going to click on New. I will snip all of this section here, and I'll leave out those greater than symbols. I'll snip that, and my goal is to put it in my output file. So I need to find my output file on the desktop, open it up. Please don't just arbitrarily put this in there anywhere. Hit enter, get to the next line, and then paste it in there. Once you have pasted in there, you know everything looks correct. You can then just close it up. It will ask you to save it, and now you have your output. I'm going to go back to the program one last time to make sure it's saved. It is saved. It's on my desktop. I'm going to close this out, close everything else out, and now I see my program file and my output file there. Once I see the two there, I then want to upload this back onto Canvas. So I'm going to click on the Submit Assignment. I'll browse, go to my desktop, and upload the program file first. And then I'll click on this again, browse, and upload the output file. So now I'm uploading these two files individually. I'm not zipping them up to upload them. Once I get them both designated for upload, I'll just click on Submit Assignment. And the assignment is now submitted. This is a little walkthrough for Lab 2 if you had difficulties with it. Hopefully this will help you out. But there's nothing better than going to see your instructor or graduate student to get help as early and often as possible.